if maybe you're feeling something different than what that song says, that the Lord will show him holding on to you, show you that he is there and he's holding on to you. Announcements for today. We, I think, just need to make sure everyone understands that we are complying with the current guidelines, and that's why we've already had one service this morning. Guidelines of having 25 people or less in here, and so had a good turnout, and just like we have here right now, and we're thankful to be able to do that. And so all our other meetings throughout the week are still scheduled, as far as I know, to take place, with the idea in mind that we stay within the guidelines of 25. So another announcement is that Mill City has some needs. The church know that the number here I've gone to help out with are their needs tomorrow. They're needing some help with, I think it's roof repair. I think there's leaking going on, and probably some other things, because it sounds like there's always more to be done. But Dale's working on getting the more details on that, so if you're interested in going up there and helping with the projects that need to be done, talk to him, and he will update you on what's happening with that. All right? Does that sound good with that, guys?
Hi, we're Jennifer.
All right, let's go ahead and sing a familiar song. That's enough. Would you be free from your burdens of sin? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Would you believe all the victory win? There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, power, wonder working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. Would you lift from your passions and pride? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Come for a cleansing to Calvary's side. There's wonderful power in the blood. Power, power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. Would you be wiser, much wider than snow? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. There's wonderful power in your blood. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are.
And thank you, Lord, for being who you say you are.
Amen. For the last song. Oh Lord, you're beautiful. Your face is all I see. And when your eyes are on this child, your grace abounds to me. Oh, you're beautiful. Your face is all I see. And when your eyes are on this child, your grace abounds to me. Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, with thanksgiving. Are we a living sanctuary for you? Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Heal my heart and make it clean. Open up my eyes to the things I see. Show me how to love like you have loved me. Break my heart for what breaks yours. Everything I am for your kingdom's cause. As I walk from this earth into eternity. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. We exalt you. We exalt you. We exalt you. Oh Lord, we exalt you. We exalt you. We exalt thee, O Lord. Heavenly Father, we come to you today. Should be like no other day. Coming before you, wanting you in our lives, wanting to walk with you, wanting to see you at work around us, and wanting to be a part of that work, Lord. But today, as we come here united in that desire, Lord, I pray for your Spirit as it leads and guides, that our hearts and our minds will be open. And Lord, as you have challenged Dale with a different talk today or later today, just look forward to what you have in store for us, Lord. May our eyes and ears and mind be open to you, Lord. Amen.
Right. I don't think so. You know what channel it is? Was it? No. I don't know. You know what channel it says on the cross? I don't know.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay, maybe
It's coming through here. Let's see if
just
I
gotta
can
trim it up.
maybe it's one of these.
Okay. All right.
We don't have our sound as well.
Yeah, there we go. You hit the right one, Ted. Excellent. All right. So sometimes when we don't know what we're doing, it actually works out anyway. Yeah, thank you. So this morning, God took us through a journey through Ezekiel 28. And that was a lot of fun. It's always fun to see what God has for us. This book is never boring. As I've shared with you before, I remember when I first became a pastor and I was worried that I'd run out of material to speak about. And that statement becomes less true all the time. It's absolutely impossible to run out of things to speak about or to share together or to consider together from this book. It's endless. It goes on and on and on. And even if there's some similar things, some similar topics, similar principles, as we see them in different ways through the lives of the people that are expressed here in the stories or the letters that are written by Paul or the accounts of the life of Christ through the Gospels are so, we go on and on with that, whether it be the Psalms or Proverbs, we see these things giving us a depth through all these different avenues that we get to look into. And so, for our service now, we're going to start in Romans chapter 8. As I think about Romans chapter 8, and as I think about as we go back into our story with regards to Joseph and his brothers and his father, I can't help but get a picture in my mind through all the different characters, and I can see myself and some of the things that are relevant to my life through all the different characters. So I could look through the eyes of Pharaoh, and I could probably see some things that would relate to me. I can look through the eyes of Joseph, and I can find some things that would relate to me. I can look through the eyes of Reuben, and I can look through the eyes of Jacob, and all of the different characters, and I can find a principle about the story that would be meaningful for my life, that would add value to my existence. And so remember that as we open up the Bible, there's multiple views that are being concurrently expressed in these stories. It's rich with that. And so often we just look at it from one perspective, and so as we go through it and we change the perspective and we look at it through different eyes, we can say, wow, that's incredible, how I can say that I've experienced something similar to that and how it can be impactful for me. And so as I look at this picture of Jacob, I see a continuation of Jacob having, I would say, a real struggle with anxiety. So he was anxious about Joseph. He was anxious about his youngest. He was anxious about the famine. He's anxious about a lot of things. Going way back, he was anxious about whether the things would play out the way they were supposed to. He was anxious about meeting with his brother Esau. He was anxious and anxious and anxious over and over again. In fact, he was anxious in his struggle that with himself that he would not let go of the one that he wrestled with all night unless he be blessed. And so even though he had these issues, these hang-ups, he still found a way to hang on to that which had the greatest value. Even though he was fully imperfect. I love that because I am fully imperfect. Things that you think sometimes that you're strong in, you might find one day that maybe that strength gets tested and maybe you aren't as strong there as you thought. It occurs. We get different experiences at different points in our life. We may be challenged in ways we never dreamed of being challenged. We may be in circumstances that we did not create. You know, I kind of laughed about last week when I was wearing Saul's armor. Today I get to wear David's armor. This feels so much better. But those are realities in our life. So my loving wife provided me with another way, and although it was not the most comfortable thing for me, it was an act of love. And so my loving wife did another act of love, and she made sure I had this shield today. So the reality is that our perspective can be filtered through these principles God gives us in spite of circumstance. And so while we are feeling circumstance, we're experiencing it in its fullness, we have a way to look at it in a healthy perspective in spite of it. Doesn't mean we won't struggle with it. It doesn't mean we'll do that perfectly. It doesn't mean that we won't fail in the process a long time before we wake up and go, aha, remember the prodigal son? He went through a lot of circumstance until it says in the Bible that he came to his senses. And he realized that there was something out there that represented love, represented grace and mercy, and all those things that he was in dire need of. He probably needed way more in the physical way because he'd been eating poorly. He was probably quite sick. There was a lot of stuff going on. And so as we open up our Bibles to Romans, Romans chapter 8, I love some of these presentations. This chapter is just rich with so much. Because it follows on the heel of the struggle, as I talked a little bit about last week, the struggle that the Apostle Paul was having, about what he was dealing with internally. Trying to come to terms with the thing you can't get away from. I've never met someone that runs away from it all that actually achieves it because they take all of the problems with them. Running away just means that you're further away from others, but you're still dealing with yourself. So we still carry the baggage whether there's people around us or not. And so, in verse 31, Paul says, what shall we say about such wonderful things as these? Where he was talking about future glory and such. And he says, if God is for us, who can ever be against us? Don't you like that question? We know this is in the Bible. We even repeat it to each other. And yet, aren't there moments where it feels like you're all alone, like Elijah, I'm the only one left, and there's this Jezebel lady that doesn't like me. And she's someone to deal with, let me tell you. Who can be against you? So the reality is that you can be against yourself probably as the worst case scenario. Because it is not somebody else that blocks you from God. The only thing that will block you from God is your own thinking, your own decisions. And even that says that even if you die with that, that doesn't separate you from God's love as he goes on in this chapter. But we can decide that we are going to not choose God's intervention, God's work in our life, God's protection, God's plan, his solution, all of the various things, because the solutions may look different than something we would plan for ourselves. And so, if we would just let that really sink in, and let this be something that we live on a daily basis, that if God is for you, then who can be against you? So the word if he's for you, then we have to say, is God for you? I have found that he is absolutely for you and for everybody, even for those who hate him. He's not only for those who are nice to him or speak kind of him. He's for those that are not, who smear his name, who actively try to harm those who are trying to give the message of who he is. When you think about all down through the ages, God is for all of those he has given life. And so we see this perpetual trend going down through the years where we come in and out of that idea that God is for us. And so he goes on here and he says, since he did not spare even his own son, but gave him up for us all, won't he also give us everything else? Who dares accuse us whom God has chosen for his own? No one, for God himself has given us right standing with himself. Who then will condemn us? No one, for Christ died for us and was raised to life for us. And he is sitting in the place of honor at God's right hand, pleading for us. And so we have this story, like many others, that is occurring in the ongoing saga of the descendants of Abraham. Now, Jacob had certainly heard about the great faith of Grandpa Abraham, right? Like, don't you think that was real? That was pretty close. That's like really close in the generational storyline, where we see that Abraham was such a big deal that clear down on through the New Testament, he's presented as a very example of what faith is. What do faith and anxiety have to do with each other? Nothing. That was a quick response, brother. I love it. Fantastic. Exactly. They have nothing to do with each other. And so what is it? It's the enemy trying to rob you of the very thing that was an incredible, precious gift that God gave each of us. And yet I guarantee you the enemy will test you in this and keep finding ways, any way he can, to cause you to experience that which will challenge faith and try to get you to walk away from it and think according to anxiety rather than according to the gift of faith. Yes?
I had one mention with that.
Mm-hmm.
I seen on a TV blog or a show before. It says like how the right and left. You have the good conscience and the
Mm-hmm.
conscious side of the mind, and the left side is either the good or the bad. However, you have that within your setting of the world. You're there at that event.
Mm-hmm.
In that event, you have yourself projected, and how you look at that. Trade that like word of dialect, right? And so that's why I've seen that before.
Mm-hmm.
Where you're at in that perspective of the world and mind.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. So it does. It shows up in a lot of different places, and we see examples of that. And it's not new to us. Remember, there were people that lived before us. And there were people that lived before those people, and they had the same kinds of things. In fact, the Bible tells us that don't think it's strange when we have these experiences that challenge us, because it's not really that different from all those others that have gone before us. In fact, in that so-called chapter of the Hall of Faith, where it speaks about those who were too good for this world. And that they, in some instances, died before they got to see the full realization of the promise of God. And so they had to walk in this faith, knowing that there could be consequences, but not all tied up in knots over anxiety. And we know this story as we jump in with Jacob, that yes, he follows through, but he's got to struggle. And the thing that occurs often that triggers anxiety is change. There's unknown things. There's stuff that we can't necessarily predict because there's circumstances that we didn't decide upon. And then even if we did decide upon those circumstances, there's going to be results to those that we can't predict. And so as we are in this environment, in the time that we're living in now, I guarantee you change will continue to accelerate. It's not going to slow down. If we're waiting for change to let us catch our breath, it's not going to happen. In fact, we may not even experience one change before the one following it occurs. You guys see that? It's hard to keep your bearings as to what's going on. And so that's why it's so important when he says that God is for you. And the proof is that he sent his son and he went to the greatest extreme. So if that wasn't enough, would he not do everything else on your behalf? Everything else on your behalf, meaning that which is good for you. Sometimes I ask God for things that I think he's pretty sure would not be good for me. And I complain to him because he doesn't give it to me. You guys know about that one? You're like, God, I'm pretty sure this is exactly what I want. Do you remember going since Christmas is coming up, did any of you go through like the JCPenney or the Montgomery Wards or the Sears Christmas catalog? And when you were children, you went through that toy section, which was giant in there, and you started circling all the different things that you just absolutely had to have. And then you might, if you had a TV, you might see a commercial about a Sock'em Box'em robot or whatever, like those variety of different things, or the Weeble Wobble, all of those amazing toys. And they're amazing until you actually had one and it held your attention for a minute, and then it was not as exciting as they made it look like on TV. Right? I used to love those little wind-up cars, not that you twist, but you wind them up by putting them on the ground and pulling them backwards, and they'd make sparks. They had the translucent cover on it, and at night you could watch it. It would make these little sparks, and it would run out of control. You know how long those lasted? A day. And then the disappointment. Oh my word, my wind-up car no longer is working. God does eternal things. What he wants for you is so much greater than a little wind-up car that lasts a day. If I can remember this thing that God both cares about my temporary life, but he is most certainly concerned about eternal things for me. And so that's why he says, what good is it to gain this world but to lose salvation? So what good is it to become well-known or a billionaire or whatever, some successful person, and then only find out that you lost the most important thing? And yet we get caught up in this stuff so easily. And so as we jump into the story here in Genesis chapter, I think chapter 46, it says, so Jacob sent out for Egypt, he set out for Egypt with all of his possessions. Now remember, we had just read that Joseph had said, never mind your possessions, right? Never mind your possessions, the best of Egypt is going to be there for you. In fact, if you move to a new environment, sometimes the possessions you have don't even really have a function in the new place you go. Like, for instance, if I move from a house that has a yard with a lawn, and then I move into a condo, I don't need my lawnmower. And so there's no point in bringing my lawnmower. It would be better for me to give it to the neighbor there, or put it on Craigslist or whatever it is, but I'm not going to need my lawnmower. And so the place that they're coming from is different than it's going to be when they get into Egypt. Egypt is a different place. And Pharaoh himself said, I will give you the best of Egypt. But here comes Jacob with all his possessions. He's not unlike us. But I want to encourage you that often it's our possessions that give us anxiety. I remember I have this friend that did very well, has done very well in his life. And he had a marriage that didn't go so well. And it affected some of his finances. He did. And so then, because he had the aptitude to gain more, when he gained more the next time, determined that he would never get married again. Because there was anxiety about loss. That's real. Those are real things. That's real stuff. That's stuff that actually occurs with us. But imagine now there's this sense of never being able to have that full experience again because of your anxiety about loss. You look from the outside, you go, wow, what a successful person. Man, they really got it together. Wisdom, has wise words, makes the good moves, all those things. But still has that little piece of anxiety hanging there about what if somebody takes all of my possessions. You know, the reality is once you give all your possessions up, you don't have to worry about that anymore. That's one of the biggest things of anxiety in a society like ours. So there's other places in the world where that's not a point of anxious thought, because they don't really have anything to lose, and so they have different kinds of thoughts of anxiety, like, you know, snakes or giant insects or something. Like, have you seen those spiders that you shoot with a shotgun because they're so big? Yeah, those are real. They live in the ground. We don't have them here. Don't worry about that. So, when he came to Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac, and during the night God spoke to him in a vision. Jacob, Jacob, he called. Here I am, Jacob replied. You know, you look at Jacob and you're going, God speaks to him a lot. He's having visions. He's having all these different things. His son Joseph has visions. This family is having a lot of interaction with God. How can somebody that's having a regular interaction with God also have issues of anxiety? Well, I mean, I think we would say that we have a relationship with God, wouldn't you? Did it take away all your anxiety? No, because we still go back and we think of things through mortal eyes rather than through the eternal eyes that God wants us to perceive. He wants us to think spiritually, not physically, although physically is where we feel and taste and see and hear and all those things, and so we are often pulled in that direction of concern rather than the things that are eternal. Because how can we think of eternal when we can't even think? Like if someone said, hey Steve, you're going to live 500 years. I mean, you might not want to. Like if you looked around our current world right now and someone said, you're going to live 500 years in this environment. I mean, I don't know. God, if you say so. I'm not real excited about that, but, you know, whatever. So, he responds, and he goes, I am God, the God of your father. The voice said, do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make your family into a great nation. Why would God tell him, don't be afraid, don't be anxious, unless he was? He's grabbing his possessions. Often when people get anxious, they start like with a little child where they want their binky and their little blanket and they want their little comfort thing. They want their mac and cheese and their mashed potatoes. Chocolate milk. There you go.
Jerry Garcia.
That's good, brother. I like it.
Why is it that they don't want?
Are we different than Jacob? He's like, man, I will feel better about I got my stuff. What do you do? Like even with a cat, we have a stray cat that lives on our porch that I go to great lengths to help. It kills mice, and we do lots of nice things for it, except for let it in the house because I can't. I'm allergic to it. So what do we do when we had to evacuate for the fire? So the guy that's allergic to the cat is worried about the cat, and so we're going to say, well, we got to take the cat with us. And for that cat to feel comfortable going someplace, we take the blanket that we've given the cat for its bed with us so that the cat will feel something familiar with it when it gets to where it's going. It even works with animals. There's something hardwired with us, with something that's familiar that we like, we find comfort in. And a lot of times that's okay, except for those times when it's something that's not good for us. It was not good for Jacob and his family to stay where they were. They would die. They were going to starve. There was a famine. They needed to be moving along. It was in their best interest that the thing God had provided for them, that they would walk in it. Imagine one of the harshest things is to say, okay, look, I'm a billionaire, and God is saying, the way I'm going to save you is you're going to have to leave your billions. And you have to walk away from that. Imagine how hard, I don't know how hard that is. I don't have that problem. Sometimes we say, well, we'd like to have that problem. Except for when you watch somebody struggling with it, it doesn't look fun. Because the struggle, no matter what it is never fun, because it's a struggle with our own self. That's why we need something greater than us to lead us through our struggle with self. So here's this great Jacob, and he's anxious, and God has to come himself and talk to him. Because even being encouraged by his sons, and by the word from his son Joseph about what was going to be there for him, even though he had all of that assurance, he's still anxious. Do you relate to this at all? I do. Absolutely. When Simona gives me that little, quiet little, hey Dale, probably don't use the Visa today. Ooh, I know what that means. I know it's a rough month. I don't ever see our finances. That's something that's a stress Simona carries. I just go out and do ministry. It works really good for me. Until Simona goes, you might just want to not use the Visa today. Okay. All right, it's going to be one of them kind of days. Everything is the potential for us to see God being for us, or it's the potential for us to act against ourselves. Because as we've talked a lot before, the devil cannot make you do anything. He does not have the ability to make you do it. One of the biggest lies is the devil made me do it. There's no such thing. God can't make you do it. The devil can't make you do it. You choose what you do. That's the amazing thing about free will. So, I can choose to look to the God who says, If I am for you, who can be against you? Now, the thing in there that we don't like is he doesn't say, but I'll make you comfortable in the process. He doesn't say that because a lot of times it's not comfortable. He didn't promise that. He promised us trouble. He said, you have trouble, and he promised we would have future trouble. And he said, I will never leave you or forsake you. But I don't see these characters in the Bible having a lot of comfortable in their life. You know, the idea of sitting in a lazy boy chair with your feet up with your favorite movie on? Yeah, for some of you it's probably on Hallmark, and that just hurts me to think about it. Where as soon as you see the Hallmark logo on the television, you already know the plot. Because it's always the same one. Yeah, I just showed my bias. I'm sorry. But it's this time of year when they start showing up. A lot of them. The Christmas Cabin. With the drama, and then it all works out great on a ski slope somewhere. And they have the magical kiss, and everyone goes off and they're reunited, and things are great. That's a good story. Life is different than that. That is just not how life works. Think of how some of the people's stories ended in the Bible. Those ones that I mentioned in the Hall of Faith. It wasn't going off and having a kiss on the side of a mountain. And I mean, for Jesus, it was a betrayal kiss. And yet, God was still with him. He never forsake him. Right up to the point when he gave his life, and then he left the tomb empty. If we die, God has promised we will leave our tombs empty also. Isn't that awesome? And so Jacob here, he's having this issue, and God himself is telling him, don't be afraid, just go do it. In verse 4 he goes, I will go with you down to Egypt. I will bring you back again. You will die in Egypt, but Joseph will be with you to close your eyes. In other words, at his point of death, he's going to have comfort. His son will be there to comfort him. You're not going to die alone somewhere. You're not going to be there starving out under the baking sun somewhere where there's a famine. You're going to be down there with the best of Egypt, and your son that you thought was dead will be there with you when you take your last breath. God is speaking to his anxiety and assuring him that it's going to be okay. This is after a whole lifetime of God showing him that it's going to be okay. He had a lot of those it's going to be okay in spite of his own doing. I could write many stories about how I have done foolish things and God has made me okay in spite of them. Again and again and again. And there's probably a lot that I don't even know about the rest of the story. Because I don't see what God is doing always on my behalf. Now here's this great icon, a patriarch, if you will, and he's having anxiety, and yet we hang our hat on them as though these are the guys that we want to follow in their way. These biblical characters. We learn it in childhood if you grew up in the Christian church. These are the guys. We read these stories and we want a life like that. Do you really? Do we really want their life? Would you trade your life for Jacob's? Would you trade it for Joseph's? Would you trade it for Reuben's? Or Job? Or would you trade it for Pharaoh's? Who in these stories would you trade your life for? Or would you just say, God, thank you for the life you've given me. I know this one, kind of. I mean, I think we have warped perspective of what our life is, actually. Generally. I don't think I've ever seen mine clearly. So this romanticizing something, not understanding, wow, what was that like? I remember when I was a kid, I used to read the Daniel Boone books. Boy, that looked like fun. I don't know. Think about after you've done that for a week. Still fun? You know, what was up there in those woods up around the Smoky Mountains in the Appalachian area? What was up there at that time? There was some stuff up there that might not have been pleasant. But the books sure made it sound like a lot of fun. So Jacob, he left Beersheba, and his sons took him to Egypt. They carried him and their little ones and their wives in wagons Pharaoh had provided for them. They even had limo service. They also took all their livestock and all their personal belongings they had acquired in the land of Canaan. So Jacob and his entire family went to Egypt. And so when they get to Egypt, with Joseph and his wife and his kids, there were 70 in the family. You can read that later on when they go through the descendants. We're going to skip that part because that makes people's eyelids come down. But it's there for a purpose, so that we can see the lineage of Jesus Christ. We can see that what God said actually occurred. What he predicted would happen. He's good on his word. These are the names of the descendants. And so he goes on through all of that, you know, like I said. And we go on to the story here after that at the end of the chapter. Then he said, when Pharaoh calls for you and asks you about your occupation, right, this is his son. He's giving him some instruction because, you know, there was some bias, some bigotry, if you will, with Pharaoh. Go figure, he was a living, breathing, sinful human being. So he had a thing against shepherds. You remember reading that in the Bible? Bigotry against shepherds. Seems like a weird thing. Is it because of the way they smelled? Is it because it wasn't glorious? Was it because, I don't know. It doesn't really say what it was, but the instruction was, this is how you are going to respond when you're asked what your occupation is. So I'm down here in verse 33. When he asks you about your occupation, you must tell him, we, your servants, have raised livestock all our lives, as our ancestors have always done. When you tell him this, he will let you live here in the region of Goshen, for the Egyptians despise shepherds. Well, that's weird. Have you ever met a shepherd that wasn't nice? I don't know. How many shepherds have you met? I mean, it's fun to go down to the lambing barns down there in Philomath, Corvallis. Have you ever gone down there to the lambing barns? Oh, that's so much fun when the babies are being born and stuff. And the people running the farm, you might call them shepherds. They've always been nice. What's that? Yeah, there is. Absolutely. I'm actually seriously considering getting some sheep. Would that make me a shepherd? I guess I'm not welcome in Egypt. I don't know. So he's coming into this place where he's going to have to face some bigotry. He's going to have to navigate that, but he's giving a blessing. God is giving him a place for his own good, his own salvation, so that he physically will not die from starvation. And then I just wonder if Jacob ever thought about some of his bias and some of his bigotry. And what about the brothers and what they had? They had a little bit going on there with bias. A little bit of bigotry, a little bit going on there. So here Jacob, he's giving instruction. This is how you navigate this. It's like you going to a dinner party and you're in a different class of people than you're used to being there with, and someone's trying to give you tips from finishing school, and you don't even know what finishing school means. Right? Where now you're all nervous, you're going, okay, is it the outside fork or the inside fork that I use on the salad? I don't know. It's so confusing. So you look around and you wait for everyone else to pick theirs up first and hope that they're actually correct. And when I use my butter knife, do I lay it on the corner of the plate? Do I set it back on the napkin? What do I do with it? All of those different things as you're navigating a new situation. That's what's going on here. They're leaving the way where they were the dominant people in Canaan. They were the ones that were prospering. They were the ones that anchored that. And now they've left that place and they're into another environment that they're not aware. Like us entering into somebody else's culture. Learning their ways, figuring out a way to navigate that. It could be challenging. So here's these shepherds going into a part of the world where shepherds are despised. Doesn't God have a sense of humor? Now, how do we not know that God wasn't also doing something for the people of Egypt so that he would bring these people that were different than them, show that they also could make some adjustments? Because remember, I said there's different perspectives. Does God love the Egyptians as much as he loves Jacob and his family? Absolutely. Does God want all of those Egyptians to be saved eternally, to be with him forever also? Yes, absolutely. And so often we look at, well, it's just from the picture of those who are the people of God, or so we call them. But aren't all people the people of God? Because did he not create them in his likeness and give them life? Where else did they come from? They weren't people from like a stone somewhere. It wasn't like the people of a twig. Like a twig all of a sudden like had a heart and grew some legs and arms and jumped off the tree and ran around, and it's a new, like, so people of the twig. If you're a person and you have life, you're the people of God. Even if you disregard him and say that he's not your God. Which is okay, he allows that. I'm reminded here as we wind down today in the book of Isaiah. Isaiah, I know some of you painfully went through a study of the book of Isaiah with me that took, I think, 6 years. Because the reality is the book of Isaiah is an entire, smaller, encapsulated version of the entire Bible. In fact, when you lay it as an outline over the entirety of the Bible, you'll see the elements of the entire Bible in the book of Isaiah. From who God is in creation, to the renewing of the heavens and the earth, and us spending eternity with him. The entirety of the Bible, the message is found in one prophet's book. Including how it is that this Messiah would come into being. In fact, what was the book that Jesus read when he stood up? And he said, "Today this is fulfilled. Behold, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me." As he's reading Isaiah, and he's saying, well, it's happening. So in Isaiah chapter 41, this is a reassurance for God saying, I will help you. I will be with you. I'm going to take care of you in spite of your difficulty. Now, Jacob had no idea the difficulty that would come once this Pharaoh died. Once this Pharaoh died, things changed for Jacob's family. They went into slavery for many, 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 many years. Which God was preserving them in that environment. So what seemed like it was wrong and bad for them, God was actually preserving their life. Of which they became large in numbers, actually threatened the kingdom. Or so it was in the mind of their captors. But here in Isaiah 41, I'm working on that, brother. Verse 8, we'll start there. But as for you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, my chosen one, listen to this. Descended from Abraham, my friend. God's saying, you guys are, this Abraham guy, you know, your grandpa Jacob, that's my friend. Well, your grandfather's friends are kind of cool, right? I mean, I guess that's subjective. I have called you back from the ends of the earth, saying, you are my servant, for I have chosen you and will not throw you away. In other words, you have great value. I'm not just going to toss you over there into Egypt and just let you cease to exist there. I'm not just throwing you away. You don't have to be anxious. You don't have to worry about that. And in our lives, that occurs in a lot of different ways. It may seem like God is just casting us aside. Think about that. For 400 years, I was asking Paul Dunn, I said, how many generations is 400 years? By about the fourth generation doesn't even acknowledge the God of the first generation. Imagine how many generations after that where there was a separation from the knowing of who this God is that intervened on behalf of Jacob and brought them there to save them from famine so that they would be able to prosper. And he said he would return them back to where they had come from, but he didn't say anything about the 400 years and the Red Sea thing. He just said, I will bring you back. Well, man, bringing you back, that kind of a timeline and journey. Think of what they went through. You're going, I don't even know about that God of Abraham and this Jacob guy. I know he's one of our ancestors, but you know what? Here we are in Egypt. That God, he said he'd take us all the way back to Canaan where they'd come from during the famine, but yeah, I don't know. But see, we see this reassurance again through the prophet. And he goes, I'm not going to throw you away. Don't be afraid. Again, just as he had shared that with Jacob. He goes, don't be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be discouraged, for I am your God. Discouragement will rob you of a lot. This is why when Paul talked about not forsaking the gathering together, he said the purpose of why we don't do it isn't just solely so that we can listen to a sermon and sing some songs. Those are nice. But it has to do with encouraging one another and inspiring one another to pursue acts of love and compassion. In Hebrews 10. Because discouragement is a real thing, you've probably experienced it. And amazing what a little bit of encouragement, even if you don't know that you're encouraging somebody, how far that goes in somebody's life without your knowledge it's even occurring. And so this little encouragement from God saying, don't be afraid, I'm with you. Don't be discouraged, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and I will help you. I will hold you up with my victorious right hand. So the words he uses here, he's not saying, look, I got my hands tied behind my back, you know those movies where the hero is all shot up, he's shot like 13 times and he's slithering on his side and I'm still going to save him. Whatever, Maybe we call those B-rated movies or something. He's going, no, my arm is victorious, it's righteous, it's strong. I can handle it. Over and over and over, God's message to you, and he goes, I've got you. Just like he did with Jacob. I've got you. I got your back. I got your front. I've got your sides. I've got your above, and I've got your below. I got you. Serious. I'm not joking. I've got you. And most importantly, I have you for eternity. I don't have you just for this 70, 80, 90 years or whatever deal. Or 500 if you're so fortunate. Again, not convinced about that one. So, Then he goes on and he talks about the enemies and how angry and how humiliated and confused, and anyone who opposes you will die and come to nothing. And so that if God is for you, who can be against you? You know, on many occasions in the Psalms and the Proverbs and such, it says that the enemy sets a trap and they fall into it themselves. This is why the Bible says vengeance is God's. We don't have to worry about it. We don't have to go take things into our own hands. We're not the justice warriors. We are not the ones that set justice straight. God is just. We are not. God is just. We don't even know justice, except for that we know God. We don't even know how to carry it out ourselves because there's bias. Everyone has it. I mean, we see that with, well, we don't like shepherds. I mean, that's goofy. You going to get justice as a shepherd moving into a country where they don't like shepherds? Well, God said, I'll make sure that you have what you need. I'm going to take care of you. In fact, I'm going to give you the best of what it has to offer. Isn't it awesome? This goofy Jacob guy that we watch his struggle all through life, where he's conniving with his mom and you know, manipulating with his lentil stew. All of those things. Coming down to the end of his life, after you would think with the whole ladder, with the angels coming and going up and down the ladder, as Hebrews talks about that, as we see that, you know, and he's there struggling, and I will not let go lest you bless me, and he goes off, and it goes okay with meeting his brother, and all those things, and now we come down to the end of his life, and he's almost sometimes looking like he's back where he started. Anxious. What if it doesn't get carried out the way it's supposed to? How am I going to make sure it happens the way it's supposed to happen? This is why I shared the way that we do the message here. That's why when I show up at 9 o'clock in the morning, I have no idea what we're going to talk about. I say, God, what are we going to talk about today? And he said Ezekiel 28. Okay, great. I'm all right with that. It's in this book. It's good. Or I could go through this process and study human psychology and look at all of you and go, what do they need today? Well, I conspire that they need a message on judgment. Right? I don't think that's what you need today. I think you need encouragement. I think you need to know that God will never leave you or forsake you. I think you need to know that if he is for you, no one can be against you. I think you need to know that in these stories that God intervened, even though sometimes it took a period of time, but in the end, look at the miraculous things that were experienced by those that waited upon God. We are told we will see miraculous, amazing things. No eye has seen or ear has heard the things that we will see that God has prepared for us. It's worth it, guys. So these stories, we can look at them as discouraging or we can see them as encouraging. I see it as God doing something on behalf of his people, and we're all his people. Don't ever let the enemy tell you something different. And he'll speak in all different ways. But I just pray that you will be encouraged today. And I'm going to call Tom up. He's going to be our closer today. Our music people left, and so if you all feel like singing a song, that's up to you. Or if Tom decides to lead us in a song, that's cool too. So whatever. No pressure, Tom. I'm not telling you have to, but anyway, God bless you guys.
I won't be leading anybody in the song. Yeah.
Oh, do you want to talk into this one?
No, I can.
Oh, I don't know if it's on. Here, tap.
Morning. Heavenly Father, thank you for letting us gather here today. Lord, let us, even though it's in two services, as long as people get together and rejoice in your love, Lord, that's all that matters. And Lord, thank you for the gifts you give us and the lessons that we learn. I ask that you continue, Lord, to give us strength, keep us calm, and bring peace and courage to us, Lord. Times of trying, as Dale just spoke about, times have always been trying, but you've been there, Lord. And Lord, I just want to ask that you give us the strength and courage to go through tonight and into tomorrow. And Lord, everything we do, we